Hello there, all you amazing people. We are going to talk a little bit about probably one of the most influential Unix companies out there, where I would say it's one of the best companies that have ever existed. Meaning it was the best for consumers, it was the best for the corporate world. They did a lot for you as a consumer and for the IT industry and for everything that has to do with what we love to talk about on this channel: development, computing, infrastructure, all of these things. These people here, Sun Microsystems, did probably more as an smaller individual company than probably even Microsoft have done today, or Red Hat, or SUSE, or Canonical are doing today for Linux. Like, had these still been around today, they got bought up by Oracle and are kind of still around, but had the Sun Microsystem, the way they operate and stuff like that, like they did in the 1980s, had that still be around today, they would probably be one of the biggest Linux distribution makers on Earth. So before we go into talk about this and be a little bit nostalgic and nerd out about an old computing favor from the past, subscribe to the channel, enable the link button, watch the whole video, and then comment and like or dislike and whatnot. So I'm not going to read off from the Wikipedia and stuff like that. You can go and do that yourself. But Sun Microsystems, Sun is we used to call them when I was a kid, like really, really young kid, but they were also going by Sun. You look at this extensive, Wikipedia here. And I know Wikipedia is not the end and be all, but I read this, so it's 99% there, 95% there. Just look at the hardware they built. That was kind of what they were known for, really, really good hardware. And Solaris, which was a Unix-like system. We'll go into like the hardware and the software a little bit later here. But just like, they built a lot of amazing stuff. Their desktops here, like, they were like, if you were like a teenager in the late 80s, early 90s, which I was not, but I just remember when I talk tech, like, people always talk favorably about Sun. They're like, oh, it's so bad, it's not around anymore and stuff like that. And I never had a Sun system. I knew people that worked for Sun in Denmark. Quite a few people that worked for Sun in Denmark. It was I said a smaller company. I mean, a smaller company compared to Microsoft, Apple, Oracle, and these like big ones we have nowadays. They were not like a mom and pop shop, but they were still not like massively big. They were like, think about Red Hat, SUSE, stuff kind of like that. But I knew a few people back when I was like a teenager in the late 90s, that worked for Sun. I had a friend's dad's cousin, friend's dad, friend that worked for Sun, and they will then take me with them when they were talking to him, because they knew I was this fucking nerdy computer idiot. So they will take me with them to talk with this adult computer idiot, and they will give me fucking software up the wazoo, Solaris, Star Office, VirtualBox, and we will get into why I mentioned these names later on. They will give me a lot of software. Hey, go home, kid, and play with this and see if you can install on your computer and stuff like that. And they would have like these Sun system up and running, and they would use like the common desktop environment, or later on Java desktop. Ooh, But look at what they did. They also did like RISC-ish, I think, ARM RISC-based or Spark-based computers. Still to this day, the old Spark computers are still highly sought about by collectors and users. They really, really want them even to this day. It's really interesting. But just look at this when they did their software department here. And you see here, one of the contributors here helped working on the V-editor, the CCL, and significant work on TCP IP. Like, they were like a proper open source company before Red Hat, SUSE, and all the Linux stuff really came around. They just did it with Unix because Linux back in the early 90s, late 80s, or early 80s was not really, well, it was not around until 1993. It was like the version 0. It was not really variable as a real system until the late 90s, is what I'm coming at here. But Sun Microsystems and Sun Software, again, had they done what they were doing back then nowadays, they would have been a Linux company. They would have been Canonical. Just way better than Canonical. They would have outcompeted Canonical, SUSE, and Red Hat. And they would be a way better company with a way better company culture and better for the consumer and the corporate world at the same time than any of those three companies are for Linux nowadays. Because all of SUSE, Red Hat, Canonical, they are business and not so much pro-consumer. Sun was also a lot of pro-consumer. They did a lot for the world that they knew, we could make a shit ton of money if we proprietary this, but we think it's better to give it to the world. Like, they could probably have stayed around to this day if they, did the thing with the networking stuff they did and proprietary with that, and the Java programming language that they invented. Heavily proprietary with that. What is basically what Oracle is trying to do now. They would probably still be around today if they heavily proprietary with VirtualBox that they bought, or StarOffice, or MySQL. Those are acquisitions they got, but they opened it up for the world. If you were like somewhat of an old Linux user, you probably remember VirtualBox was done by Sun. It was called Sun VirtualBox. If you're really, really old Linux user like me, you remember StarOffice, which then became LibreOffice, and I think StarOffice became OpenOffice, like the proprietary version of it became OpenOffice, and the open source version of it became LibreOffice. They have some correlations there. They did so, and then you have SunOS, Solaris, which is open source now, and stuff like that. They again, look at all this the Java platform, the Office suite, the virtualization software, database management system. Sun acquired MySQL AB, the developer of the MySQL database, in 2008. They did a lot of stuff here. Like, they had storage. They were like, if you're an infrastructure guy and you're a server admin or IT admin, and you're like, we don't like Microsoft, we don't want to go the Apple route. What Linux company should we go with? Should we go with Canonical, SUSE, or Red Hat? Well, back in that day, the question would not have been Linux, because Linux was just not ready back then. But they were like, we don't really like Microsoft, we don't really like the Apple way. What Unix-like system should we go with? We had BSD, we had Sun Microsystems, and then they had like HP Unix and IBM Unix and stuff like that. And a lot of people would go with Sun Microsystems because they basically operated like they were a Linux company for our comparison today. They will, like I said, they will be a Linux company today if they were around today. They would have based everything on Linux instead of Unix if they could. They were like the go-to people for anything non-Microsoft and Apple, basically. They were also one of the go-to people for server infrastructure and stuff like networking and workstations and stuff like that, if you want the Unix experience. And just to go a little bit in here to highlight it, we have AI now, and I spent innovations wrong, so if I do this here. This is was it Gemini just summarizing it here? This is their noble innovations. They did a lot of other innovations. So this is what they have in the Java platform. If you are an Android developer, you should thank Sun. If you have embedded devices, thank Sun, because there's a lot of Java running in embedded devices. Even on Linux today, a lot of the software on Linux is Java-based or Python-based. If you're doing anything in the corporate or financial world, thank Sun, because a lot of that is Java. If you're doing anything in the corporate world that needs massively stability, it's probably done in Java. You should thank Sun for C#, because Microsoft looked at Java and was like, in the 90s, Java, when it was invented, Java was a little bit clunky, it was new, it was a little bit heavy, resource hungry, and Microsoft was like, we like what they are doing, but we think we can do it better. Just like they did with JavaScripting, they made TypeScript, we can do it better. And then they locked it down to the Microsoft ecosystem. But C# is just Java with additions. It's not the total right comparison, but think about C# as C++ to C. It's C with classes in the C world, but C# is just Java plus, and then heavily locked into the Microsoft ecosystem. TypeScript is JavaScripting plus. So again, thanks Sun Microsystems for if you're a C# developer. Unix, Solaris, a Unix-based OS. A lot of you Linux people out there would like that. They were like the forefront of distributions that was not Windows. OSs that was not Windows. Network file system, NFS. Thanks Sun for that. The Spark systems. Thanks Sun for that. The open system philosophy. Thank them for that. The acquisitions of MySQL, VirtualBox, StarOffice. But the big problem here with good old Sun Microsystem, and what I honestly think is their mistake, or not their mistake, but why they failed, is that a lot of people saw what they were doing, and because it was open source, they could see how they were doing it. And then it don't take a lot of effort to say, we can add to this or do something similar and lock it down to our system, a proprietary. That's a little bit what SUSE and Red Hat and Canonical kind of do with their company-specific solutions. So Red Hat, SUSE, and Canonical, they have technologies that only work with Red Hat, SUSE, and or Canonical technologies, even though it's built on open source. So a lot of companies did what Canonical, SUSE, and Red Hat is doing right now. They would be like, even Sun did it to some degree, but a lot of companies did it even more aggressively. They would be like, you're giving all of this away that is worth billion and a lot of people are highly depending on. Let us make it a little bit better and make it only work on our system so we have an advantage you don't have. They basically took advantage of you. It's basically what Valve is doing with Proton. They take advantage of Wine and the open source community. They're not locking it down to the Steam Deck, but they're not giving so much back to the community either. They are like, Valve is not a good company for the consumer. It's even worse for the what is it called? The developers. But Valve is not your friend. They just happen to be more consumer friendly than EA and stuff like that. Basically, their generosity killed them, in my opinion. And you kind of see that happening with a lot of open source projects, if they are not careful, is that someone with a lot of money and a lot of development power comes in, becomes your friend, and then they take what they need and they leave you behind, because now they are the big dogs. Now people are depending on their version of this thing, and that's how they outcompete you. Valve is kind of doing that now. Microsoft has done this for decades in any software-related technology you can think of. And like I said, SUSE kind of do it, Red Hat kind of do it, even Canonical kind of do it today. They are pro open source and pro Linux and blah blah, and then they still have stuff that is heavily tied into their ecosystem. They are your friend. They help you out, but they also, and then they do the add-on to that is only if you are their friend that you can use, or you can only use if you use their products, or you can only use if you pay them. And then you get more and more depending on their version of this thing, or what they are providing that the others are not. And then the open source or the free versions become less and less relevant. Again, it's not totally like that, but you get the idea. This is them using Unix and Linux starting to take over the world in the corporate server world. Didn't help. They should have. It would be a lot of money and a lot of infrastructure changes, but they should have based Solaris on Linux the second Linux starts to become the dominant, or start to take over the server world. They should have just rebranded to Linux. They will probably help them survive a little bit longer in the corporate world, because when Linux became good enough for the server market, nobody wants Unix anymore. They want Linux. But Sun still kept Solaris or Sun OS Unix-based and not Linux-based, all up till this day when Oracle still have it. But they should have done what everyone else did, was just rebranding their Unix system to a Linux system. It would probably have saved them, I hope, or I imagine it could probably have saved them at least a few years, if they had the money to do it, which I suspect they didn't have, because hardware sales were going down, software sales were going down, other people outcompeting them in their market that they were in, because they just did what they did better. Numbers of employees, they peaked in 2006, but but about 40,000 employees. It was really hard when Sun Microsystems was alive, even when they did badly, it was really hard to find something super negative to say about them. And that is really, really rare. That a company is like, it's really hard to find something bad to say about them. Like even Valve, which is, if you're a gamer, is regarded as one of the best gaming, gaming store providers in the industry. But they even to this day are battling monopolies, anti-consumer practices. They had to change their EULA because of a law. Back in last year, you couldn't sue them because you didn't live in the States. They could do whatever they want. You were not allowed to sue them. Now you can. You just have to sue them in Washington, I think it is. So you have to go to the United States and sue them in Boston. You can't sue them via where you live in the world. And there was a lot of stuff like that. A lot of the things that Valve is doing that is pro-consumer is a lot of times because they got mandated to do so, or they almost got into legal trouble by not doing it. They just hide it as they are being your friend. But yeah, there's a lot of laws that lawsuits that have made Valve introduce certain things. I don't think that ever happened, or if it happened, it was really small. Like it didn't happen that often with Sun Microsystems. Again, Microsoft, Apple has gotten mandated to do a lot of things. Google, Oracle, not so much with Sun Microsystem. Red Hat has got that. I think even SUSE and Canonical, maybe not law, but got pushed by the community to do things. Not so much with Sun Microsystem. They were like almost, there's always haters, but they were almost universally liked. They were almost universally never in any problem. Valve is still having monopoly issues. They're still getting sued by both other store vendors, or what you will call them, and developers because of monopoly. They are still heavily anti-developer. They take way too much money from the developers. They're way too restrict. They don't really like game developers, apparently. I don't know. They just look like they don't do that. Almost nobody talked bad about Sun Microsystems. It was so bad that Microsoft hated Sun Microsystems in the 90s. They would have parties where they would demolish Sun sales reps' cars. They would buy their old used cars, put them into the canvas, and demolish the cars in a party if they took over a market for Sun. And this is coming from an old Microsoft employee, by the way. Where they would do that, they would have launch parties of a software that were competing with Sun Microsystem, and they would have, when they got a bigger market share, they would then buy old Sun decommissioned cars and, like I said, demolish them because they won. Microsoft probably was more afraid of Sun Microsystem than they have ever been of Linux. That was how they were how big they were in the 90s. Even to this day, Linux is not, Microsoft has embraced Linux to some extent nowadays. But even when Microsoft hated Linux the most, they didn't hate it as much as they hated Sun Microsystem. Think about that. And like I said, they were just universally liked. They had a great community. They were great for developers. Unraid, the NAS software that you're using right now, the main inventor and CEO used to work from Sun Microsystem. And he got the idea, I think, because he was doing something with network storage at Sun Microsystem. And then later on, when I think it was after Sun Microsystem got defunct, I can't remember. But he then started Unraid because of something he got seeded in his mind by working for Sun Microsystem, more or less. And there's a lot of stories like this. A lot of people that are really important, even in Linux today. A lot of people that are really into Linux today used to be Sun Microsystem employees or fans and stuff like that are now doing what they did for Sun Microsystems. They're doing the same thing for Linux. Even some companies that was if you're a big company, you would have orbiters or supporters where the main business reason is to support your software. There are companies where the whole business model is supporting either Apple or Microsoft or Oracle or Google solutions. That's what they're built upon, is the support, the integration, or their software is helping elevating those big companies' software that they provide. There was that with Sun Microsystems. They had not sister companies, but they had companies that their business model only existed because Sun Microsystems existed. And if Sun Microsystems was not around, they didn't have a fucking business. And when Sun Microsystems started to go downhill, they migrated that over to Linux. Had they just gone the fucking Linux route, it would probably been better for them. I just don't know if it was financially viable and all these things, but they should have jumped on the Linux wagon early, because they could have been the combined Sun, SUSE, and Canonical of Linux. They could have outcompeted all of them. They could probably have been better for the Linux world than all of them. They would probably have done more for the Linux world than all of them. I actually think back in the day, Sun used to also contribute to GNOME and other open source things. But Oracle bought them out, which is like where we are today, where if you want to try Solaris, you can still do that, like official Solaris. Oracle have that name. Oracle owns VirtualBox, you know. I don't like Oracle. I don't think anyone likes Oracle. I would not say funny, it's kind of sad that this good of a company, or what you will call it, or a company that is run in the way that we don't care that much about becoming the most rich company in the world. We just want to do cool shit. And we want you to be part of this cool shit. That's the feeling I get when I see videos about Sun Microsystems, when I hear old engineers talk about working for Sun Microsystems. Heck, when like I said, my friend's friend or my friend's cousin was talking to me about working for Sun Microsystems, that was the feel I got. That was the impression I got as a super young kid that barely understood what a fucking computer was. But they were so passionate about working for Sun Microsystems. They were so passionate about what they were doing. And for lack of a better word, it felt like a community. And they wanted you, the customer, and the corporate world to be part of that. They were business people. They did a lot of business stuff. They also did some shady shit. That's what businesses do. But for the most part, that was the feeling that you got out of Sun Microsystems, is that for nobody's perfect, but they would probably be as perfect or be as close to be the perfect FOSS company as you can imagine if they were around today and Linux-based. If they were around today and Linux-based, the Linux community will probably like them more than any other of the big corporate Linux solutions we have out there. Because of the way that they conducted themselves, the way they did business, the way that they actually interacted with the community. They helped the community, they gave back to the community. Hate it or not, the closest one is Canonical. Because if you think Canonical is bad, SUSE is worse than Canonical, Red Hat is worse than Canonical. I'm sorry to say it, but Canonical is probably your best bet of a corporate entity supporting Linux. But Sun Microsystems, if they were in the Linux world, they would be even better than Canonical. Better for the consumer, listening more to the consumer, and also catering to the corporate world. Again, I was not there, I didn't work there. This is just the feeling that I get from watching people talk about their experience with Sun Microsystems, what they, watching documentaries about it, what they did, how the founders were and stuff like that. I'm not saying they were perfect. I'm not saying they didn't do shady shit. Every company does. Every organization. Norm has done shady shit. KDE has done shady shit. Everyone that wants to survive in a business world, even if you're a non-profit and you're open source, you have to do some shady shit sometimes. Or you have to bend the rules a little bit sometimes. Or you have to not listen to one group and listen to another group to stay alive. Everyone has done that. Even YouTubers fucking do that sometimes. They make videos they may not like to make, but the viewers really, really want them to make. You get what I'm coming at here. And I always personally get like a really, really like tingly fun feeling on the inside when I talk about Sun Microsystems, hear people talk about Sun Microsystems, come across anything has to do with Sun Microsystems. So actually, that's why I like VirtualBox to this day. I know it's an Oracle thing. I always had this like Sun Microsystem VirtualBox. It's still printed in my mind. So every time I use VirtualBox today, it takes me back to the Sun days, to all the stories people talking about and blah blah blah. And again, we always reminiscence of the past, and we always will sit and miss the past. Like when you're 20 years old, you miss being a kid. When you're 40 years old, you miss being 30. When you're 50, you miss being 40. When you're 60, you miss being 40. When you're 60, you miss being 40. You get what I'm coming at here. You always go back in the past and reminiscence about the past, because we tend to forget the bad and only remember the good. Even though your life may be better at 50 than it ever was in your 30s, 20s, and 40s. A lot of people get their best life in late 30s and up because they are financially secure, they have a good job, they have a good family and all that shit. They actually have a better life, heck, even in their 50s a lot of times, than they do in their 40s and 30s. So again, just a little detour about reminiscing of the past. But I wish more people would remember Sun Microsystems. But it is getting so long ago that they defunct, like they defunct in 2010. There are probably people watching tech channels. There are people watching tech channels today that either got born around that time or was not even born when that happened. And they don't even know about this company. This with Silicon Graphics, CGI, I think Silicon Graphics Industries, what the fuck it was called, are two companies from the 80s and 90s that I think we should never forget. We should never forget Sun Microsystems. They helped out with so many technologies, or helped bring out so many technologies to the world that we are either using indirectly or taking for granted today. But anyway, again, a long-ass video. Just want to reminisce a little bit about Sun. It's something I kind of want to dive more into and talk more about, because it is one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing today is kind of Sun Microsystems. Linux got me interested into computing and stuff like that. Or the operating system part of computing. I did computing before I knew about Linux. I helped people repair computers when I was like 11, 12 years old. And it was Windows-based. Built computers for them, changed hardware, cleaned it up. All of the things you do as a tech support. I did that when I was like 11, 12 years old. Linux got me into operating systems. Sun Microsystems got me into the infrastructure part, the networking part, the what you will call it. Microsoft just got me into cleaning. It just got me into fixing and cleaning Windows. But yeah, if you have any idea about Sun Microsystems, and again, I probably got something wrong or misremember some stuff, correct that down below. Talk about your experience with Sun Microsystems, if you were around when they were around. If you know someone that was around at that time and you've heard them talk about it, double that down below. Let's get a really fucking fun conversation going about Sun Microsystems. Heck, if you really, really want me to, when you go onto my Discord, we could make a Sun Microsystems room in there where we could sit and be like old farts talking about Sun Microsystems for days and days. I'm really open for that. But anyway, see you all later. Have a good day. Bye bye.